Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric, this being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. Very interesting episode, a lot of things to break down about this episode. First and foremost, there is like the main overarching case in this episode. Very interesting one because it starts off with a woman who is kind of doing kind of a marathon and ends up going to the finish line with a knife in her back. This leads to a cabin. I love that once again Sherlock being able to figure things out because it's like, oh yeah, like the mud that was on her leg could only come from like a marsh, and there was only a certain part of her leg, and a marsh could only be in a certain specific area. It's just like the things you're able to notice and pick up still astounds me even at this point in time in the series, but it shouldn't come as a surprise. Still astounding nonetheless. But him and Belle come across a cabin and little shack, and there's blood there, but there's like the blood, it's with the splatter and everything, most likely from a gunshot. Then there's drag marks. They drain the marsh, and then there's like, hey, there's a dude's dead body. His name Rennie, had a bullet in his head, and then there was a dead hog named Truffles, which that kind of makes you a little sad seeing. It's just like, oh, that sucks. But it turns out, Truffles was poisoned, and most likely the fact is because he was making moonshine, Rennie was most likely made to make ricin, and then like he was killed because he was no longer needed after he had to watch his pet Truffles get killed by the ricin to test it out. So it turns into this very long, complicated thing of like, okay, who would want him dead? This all leads them back to there's this dude named Todd who was a wine dealer who ended up getting shot by a similar gun, left for dead and everything. But luckily, they were able to get to him in time. It's kind of like brutal. Like the gun was put in his mouth, the trigger was pulled, and basically the bullet went from his mouth out of his neck. It's a gnarly situation. And then it turns out like the person who had did that to him was looking for a specific wine bottle, and it turns out that's connected to some hedge fund dude named James Woods. Interesting name. But then it's like, I say that because obviously there's the actor James Woods. I'm sure there's no correlation, but it's just, I know a name's a name, and I don't know why. It's stupid, I know, just my mind, the way I think. Nevertheless, turns out he might be the one that's specifically targeted because he is really into this particular wine that was stolen, and so it turns out that wine is where the ricin was going to be put in. So they suggest that, hey, why don't we use you as bait? We go to this event where like the wine is being sold at, because that's where you're going to go anyway. But this way, the killer won't show up with the wine if they don't know you're here. So they have to wait. And I love like James is kind of uncomfortable, but it's just kind of like Sherlock and Joan are having to tell him like, calm down. The fact of the matter is, the moment the killer makes the switch, we'll bust him. The cops are here. Everyone's watching and everything, so don't worry, we got this. And then the dude's like, well, why do I feel so nervous? Like I got a gun, like, target on my chest. Because, Joan was trying to make him feel better by being like, the fact of the matter is, because Sherlock's like, the fact is, this is, the whole point of this is anonymity, because if they kill you with poison, yeah, they just, gun or any other face-to-face means wouldn't be as good. And he's like, wait, what does that mean? Joan's like, basically it means the killer would rather kill you from far away because they think they couldn't kill you upright and then get away with it. So this is the best way, especially because there's a whole bunch of people here. By the time it got found out how you died, they'd be long gone. Even Sherlock's like, yeah, you'd be most likely vomiting, choking on your own vomit while the killer's off on another continent. And I love James being like, you two have terrible bedside manner. And I thought that was kind of funny because I'm like, yeah, that seems like a Sherlock thing to say. It's just funny to hear Watson say that too. But I guess after all these years, some of Sherlock's bedside manner rubbed off on. It's just kind of, it almost seems like Watson's getting annoyed. Like, okay, don't worry, we got your back. You don't have to worry about it. Because Joan knows, because she's had a target on her back before. Sherlock's had a target on his back before too. So I guess for them, it's like, we've been through this, not just with other people, with ourselves as well. We got this type of thing. It's interesting to find out what this was all about too. It turns out that this is all about the dude that was at the bar that was working with Rennie. It turns out this is all about him killing James for Corinne, because basically he's been obsessed with James' wife the entire time, and it's like what set him off is like, oh, she married someone, no, she's mine, and that's what this is. I even love the new captain being like, oh, so interesting, literally went through all this killing and can't kill the actual person he was aiming for. Like, that ends up falling through. It's just so interesting. I also love the fact that Sherlock figured him out, because it's like, well, for one, it's like the moment Sherlock stops him, I'm like, who this guy supposed to be? And then Bale points it out. I was like, oh, I would recognize you without the cap and the beard. And I'm like, that is true. That's wild. But it's like, because the way his shoes are tied is very similar to the, is not similar, is exactly the same knot as, you know, the ones used on the way, you know, tied to the rocks to weigh down Rennie and Truffle's bodies, and it was also used on Todd as well. But it's like, dude, that's what this was all about. It's crazy. And the reason why Corinne didn't recognize him, because apparently he lost the 200 pounds he had, well, the extra 200 pounds he had the last time she had saw him, he lost it in prison. And just like Joan had suspected, like, the reason why he's using such an old school gun is because he can't legally get one, it turns out, because he got like a weapons charge. And you know, so it's a whole situation. And I was like, that's a fascinating turnabout for this case. One of my favorite little things about this case, too, is the fact is, at one point, Joan's sleeping, and then obviously Sherlock does his thing. I was like, okay, so how is he going to wake her up? Literally crawls in bed. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And he screams, Marcus! And she gets shaken awake. I mean, she gets scared and just goes, ugh! And I'm like, he's like, Marcus is apologizing, and Sherlock's like, no, me and Watson are obviously bright-eyed and, you know, wide awake and everything. I'm like, I love it. I was like, that's such an asshole move to wake her up. To be fair, Sherlock's always had asshole moves of, like, waking her up. The fact of the matter is, it even got me thinking, like, is there a compilation of all the different ways Sherlock has woken her up over the course of the series? Didn't I literally make a comment on that before of, like, these might be the last times we ever get to see Sherlock, like, wake her up in these respective ways and stuff like that? So it's just funny that was just like the most simplest and just asinine way to wake her up. I love it. Just kind of scaring the shit out of her. You know, it's so good. Because even I don't remember all the different ways he's woken her up over the years. So it'd be so interesting to kind of get a compilation of that. It's actually, you know, you can always find interesting compilations that people put together, you know, especially from like TV shows, but just in general, the compilations you'd find on YouTube. So I'm curious, is that a thing, you know? I'd love, if not, I'd love for someone to do it, because I think it'd be a pretty neat idea, the different ways he's woken her up. But that's just me. But nevertheless, very interesting case in that department. But then there's another side of this episode, because there's this dude named Odin who's a part of this group called he started this company, Odker, and so he made a contribution to this buyback guns program that was kind of started up in Joan's name. Sherlock set it up a little while back, and it's like, oh, he made a huge donation, wanted to meet with Joan, but it's all about like, hey, actually, I did this because I need your help. I think someone on my staff might be part of this conspiracy that, you know, threatening to kidnap my niece Abigail. Well, lo and behold, she brings this back to Sherlock. Sherlock's reluctant to take it, because it's like, well, to be fair, like, you know, and Sherlock, you know, because Joan's like, why are you not interested? And he's like, the fact of the matter is, you make it seem like, you know, it's like, because the fact is, the money is like a charitable thing. It's meant to be like, oh, without any strings attached to it. But now there's strings attached to it. It's like, why are you taking such an interest in it? But for her, it's like having someone like Odin as kind of like, oh, like he's got a, you know, that's a nice contact to have, especially considering he's the 8th richest person in this continuity and stuff like that. So that's interesting. And I love, it's like, you know, having, you know, a relationship with someone like that. And no, I don't mean sex. And before you say it, no, I don't mean sex. And Sherlock was like, actually, I was, you know, going to say that. So I love that. But lo and behold, they look into it, different people. I even love that it's like, oh, that person Joan was checking out. And it's like, oh, yeah. And he apparently illegally acquired Sharknado, downloaded it torrent-wise or something like that. Interesting movie to decide to get illegally like that. And I don't know. I mean, this is coming from someone who's never seen the Sharknado movies. None of them. I've seen previews and bits of them. I got the gist of them, but nevertheless, it's just interesting. I just like out of any movie they picked that movie. That's pretty cool. But nevertheless, they were looking into a dude named Blake. But it turns out Blake's good because he has a gambling habit, but he actually kind of, like, he's hosting games and stuff like that. And even Sherlock's like, honestly, he's actually kind of on the up and up because of this whole situation. So there's that. But then later on we find out, oh no, Odin's actually behind it himself. I had an inkling of a feeling about that. So I know I should also mention, blanking on the actor's name. I think they even said it at the beginning. The actor who plays Odin. I've seen him in plenty of things. I swear, I could have sworn, like, I think the first thing I ever saw him in was True Blood. I feel like, I know he was in a little bit of Grimm, if I remember correctly. I feel like there was something else I remember him from, but I can't place it. I know he had a recurring role in Orphan Black. I don't remember his character's name. He's kind of an asshole in Orphan Black. Oh, especially as the series progressed, he turned into more and more of one. But nevertheless. So, but it turns out, like, I had this inkling, like, is he the one behind all this? Like, is this... It turns out, yes, the whole thing was a test for Sherlock and Joan, and it's like, wait, what? You already came to us because of our reputation, so what were you testing? It's like, no, I wasn't testing your reputation, I was testing you. The fact is that you two would willingly go through illegal means because you think someone's in danger. It kind of shows, like, their, like, how far they'll go, like, obviously, you know, to protect someone's life and stuff like that, and that's what he needed, because, and it kind of talks about, oh, like, the fact is, Patrick Mears, and I'm like, oh, okay, here we go, it all tying together like that, so he has a connection to Patrick, and it's like, oh, you're like Patrick's boss in whatever this situation is that you're involved in. And it's like, yes, I let Patrick know about what Tim was up to. He's not a terrorist, he's actually a patriot. You know, he saved 200 lives potentially doing what he did. Now, I didn't ask him to shoot your captain, but obviously he did that because, you know, he wanted to, like, cover up what he had done, sure, but I didn't tell him to do that, so it's a terrible mistake, but he shouldn't be kind of labeled as some terrorist or something. It's like, okay, now this is interesting, because, like, you know, Odin's whole thing is like, oh yeah, fighting, like, simple answers to the most complicated, you know, questions and stuff like that, like, you know. So that in itself probably seems like it might be bearing in mind of what he might be up to. Like, for him, it's like this whole thing that he's a part of, whatever it is. Because, again, Patrick was like, you know, like, you have to be strong. So it's that thing of, like, doing some bad for the ultimate good type of situation of, like, I'm wondering what the grand scale of this whole situation is supposed to be. It's fascinating to me. I guess that whole thing of, like, okay, call this number about and say Joan trouble. So now it makes sense. They weren't calling a hit on her. I assumed that's what that whole situation was. But it's like, no, calling the boss, because he wanted to see firsthand what kind of people they were. And it's like, for him, he's like, no, I actually want you two part of our organization, because it's like that thing of, like, willing to go above and beyond for the greater good type of situation. So what they're up to, who knows? The fact is, Joan and Sherlock are willing to cross some lines legally, sure. The fact is that people were murdered in this regard is not something that they're comfortable with. And the fact of the matter is, Odin's kind of shown himself to be like, hey, I'm not, you know, your standard person that you're dealt with, you know. So 100% of what that means, I guess it's supposed to be like, you've never crossed paths with someone as powerful as me. So there's this storyline to deal with, like whatever it is that him and Patrick Mears are all connected to. But there's also the storyline of, remember, the FBI agent dude that's like threatening Sherlock that, like, hey, if, you know, you ever come near me or whatever, if anything ever happens to me, it's going to turn out, I'm going to release some stuff that's going to point out that Joan is in fact the one that killed Michael and kind of like crumble her life essentially. So there's still that complicated situation, and now there's everything with this. It's like, okay, so what direction is this all heading towards? What is this group and this organization? Is Odin at the top, or is he a cog in a machine? Even though he's higher up, is he just another cog? Or is this whole thing his plan? Like, once again, is this him, like I said, trying to do good, you know, using his resources, but maybe it's kind of like a, because I made comparisons of like, oh yeah, there's the whole Cabal situation that Moreland's connected to, but I was wondering, like, could this be kind of a similar thing? It's, you know, in a similar regard of like, we're doing good even though we have to go about legal means. I have no idea. Like, he has power and resources, but I'm guessing we're going to be seeing a lot more of him potentially, especially because it's like, you're connected to why our friend Gregson got shot. So it's like, yeah, we're not just going to kind of let that go easily. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where this ultimately ends up taking us going forward to the next episode and beyond. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.